I feel like every gamer has that one game they absolutely love, but when you check the reviews or see what other people think, it's clear that most people don't feel the same way. And so today I'm playing 3 games that sit in the mixed reviews range on Metacritic to see if they actually deserve that rating or if they're secretly bangers. I'll be giving each game my own score, and by the end we'll find out if mid really means mid. Also, as this is my first video on the channel, if you like videos like this then please consider dropping a like and subscribing. Anyway, let us begin with the first game. The first game I decided to play is Vampire, which released in 2018 and was developed by Don't Nod Entertainment. It puts you in the shoes of a doctor in plague-ridden London, who also happens to be a vampire. So basically your job is to save people, while also deciding who to feed on, which is a bit of a conflict of interest, I do have to say. Now I did play this back in 2019 on Xbox, but I'm not even exaggerating when I say I remember almost nothing. Like, not the story, not the characters, not even the ending. The memories of experiencing this game has vanished with time. Looking at the reviews, Vampire sits right in that mixed range with a 72 Metascore and a 6.7 user score. By the way, I'll be using the PC score for all the games because that is what I am playing on. A lot of the critics pointed out disappointing gameplay, especially in regards to the combat, the writing being described as stilted, and the feeling that the game never quite reached its full potential. But after playing it again, I'm not sure I fully agree. You play as Jonathan Reed, a doctor who comes back from war and almost immediately gets turned into a vampire, which is already a strong setup, but what I like about it is how grounded he feels. At the start he's completely overwhelmed, which makes sense, but he doesn't stay stuck in that state. He adapts with the help from 2 characters, a vampire woman named Elizabeth Ashbury and a normal guy who's named Edgar Swansea. And there's something I really like about the irony of his character, because he's a doctor who specialises in blood, now needing blood to survive. It's such a simple idea, but it works really well throughout the game. Also, his relationship with Elizabeth is actually okay too. It's definitely not the best development of a romance that I have ever seen, but it's also not the worst one either. What really surprised me though, and what I think is probably the best thing in the game, is how it handles choice. Because technically the game gives you a very simple option. You can feed on NPCs to get stronger, and if you choose to do that, the game becomes easier in terms of the combat because you will have more XP to invest into things like additional health, stamina, or even new abilities to help you survive the more difficult combat encounters. But the trade-off is where it gets interesting. Every NPC is an actual character. They've got dialogue, side quests, connections to other people, and if you feed on them, they're just gone. So you're not just losing a health bar in the world, you could potentially lose content if you're not careful. And on top of that, each district has a stability system, so if you start feeding too much, the entire area can just spiral into chaos. What I like is that the game doesn't let you cheese morality either. Even if you decide that you're not going to feed on anyone and you're going to go for the good morality run, the major story choices can still mess things up. So you're constantly in this position where you might be trying to do the right thing, but the game never really guarantees that you are. And all of that works really well with the setting. The districts actually feel different from one another, but Whitechapel in particular just nails that atmosphere. It's dark, rainy, kind of miserable, but I gotta say I love that vibe. You really feel like you're walking through a city that's falling apart. Even the smaller details help with that, like the notes and bits of lore you find laying around. There's enough to make the world feel rich, but not so much that you're just picking up documents every 5 seconds and ignoring them. The gameplay itself sits in this weird middle ground, and the combat is where a lot of critics show their disappointment. The combat feels like a simplified version of something like Dark Souls, which is the only From Software game I have played, even though I've only played it for like 2 hours. But it has that same idea of stamina management, dodging and picking your moments. Hits feel impactful, abilities mix things up nicely, and it's just challenging enough to keep you engaged without being too frustrating. And I like how your role as a doctor still ties into the gameplay and choice system too. Crafting medicine to heal NPCs isn't just a side thing, it actually feeds back into the district's stability, and so if you neglect it, then you will have consequences. Even the way the game is structured is pretty focused. You've got the main story and then investigations, which are basically side quests, but there aren't loads of them, which to be honest I think was a good choice for the game. It doesn't feel overly bloated, it feels like a game that actually respects your time. But this is where the cracks start to show as well, because there are things in the game that could be somewhat better. The dialogue is a good example. It's not bad, the voice acting is actually pretty solid most of the time, but sometimes conversations feel like they go in circles. Characters will sometimes repeat the same point in slightly different ways, and you start to notice it the longer you play. The bosses are another one. There are a couple of interesting ones, which I won't spoil, but most of them just don't leave much of an impression. The fights themselves are fine, but they never really feel like a highlight. In addition to this, the weapon system also feels like a missed opportunity. You've got a decent variety visually, but mechanically they're all very similar. Once fully upgraded, a lot of them end up doing basically the same thing. And I just kept thinking how much better it would be if each weapon had a small unique effect, something to make choosing between them actually matter. The final nitpicky thing is that there's no fast travel, which isn't a huge deal, but there are definitely moments where you feel that it would have been a useful addition. Especially when you're going back and forth between districts, it can get a bit tedious. And I think that kind of sums up Vampire as a whole. It's a game full of really strong ideas, especially with its choice system and atmosphere. I really enjoyed my time with Vampire. I feel like the first time I played it, I just wasn't paying much attention to what was going on. However, in regards to the score, is it fair or do I think it should be different? Well, I think it should be pushed up a bit higher to at least a score of 76 or 77. If I had to put it on a tier list, which I will do for the rest of the games in the video, then I would put it in an A tier for sure. But I'm interested to know, have you played this? And if so, do you agree with my points? Or do you have a different opinion about the game? Let me know. This next game had been sitting in my backlog for ages, and that is The Council. I'd seen the name before, I knew it was some kind of choice-driven mystery game, and when I was scrolling through Metacritic looking for games for this video, I saw the scores and immediately thought that this is exactly the kind of game I'm looking for, because the reception for this game is all over the place. It has a 67 critic score, but then a 7.6 user score, and when you actually read the views, it gets even more confusing. Game CZ gave it a 50 and basically said the game had promising beginnings before collapsing into an incredibly stupid story filled with bad voice acting and technical problems, which isn't exactly encouraging. But then on the complete opposite side, CD Action gave it an 85 and said something that honestly sets insanely high expectations. Big Bad Wolf did what Telltale Games Works promised but could never deliver, which is a crazy statement. So now I'm sitting there wondering if this is going to be some hidden masterpiece or a complete disaster. Going into the game, I didn't have much of an idea of what it was going to be about. The only things I knew was that it was set around the time of the French Revolution, involved secret societies, and took place mostly inside a giant mansion, which to be fair is already enough to get me interested, especially because I'm someone who loves historical settings in games. And The Council absolutely nails that part at first. The mansion itself is probably one of the strongest things in the entire game. The architecture, the decor, the atmosphere. It really feels like this isolated meeting place for incredibly powerful people. And then you start realising some of those people are actual historical figures. That was something I really enjoyed throughout the game. You're walking around talking to these larger than life political and historical figures while also trying to unravel this massive conspiracy, and it creates this really unique atmosphere that I honestly haven't seen many games pull off. The story follows Louis de Rocher, who arrives at this island mansion looking for his missing mother. And at first, the game feels pretty grounded. You're investigating clues, talking to members of the secretive council, trying to figure out who's lying, who's manipulating who, and slowly realising that the people running the council are basically treating everyone else like chess pieces. That was probably the coolest part of the entire story to me. The longer the game went on, the more it felt like these powerful members were constantly setting traps, testing people, manipulating conversations. Every interaction felt calculated. And when the game leads into the political manipulation and mystery stuff like that, it's actually really interesting. But before I even got invested in the story, one thing became immediately obvious. The voice acting is inconsistent. Some characters sound perfectly fine, but Louis himself, the main character, genuinely has some rough line delivery at times. And what made it even stranger to me is that Louis and his mother are French, and that I'm pretty sure that Louis grew up in France, but they both have American accents. Meanwhile, everyone else sounds like they're actually from where the game says they're from. So every time Louis started speaking, it weirdly pulled me out of the setting a bit. And then there's the technical side of the game, because that review mentioning technical mistakes turned out to be quite true. Almost immediately, I noticed this weird stuttering issue whenever turning the camera. Not full lag, not frame drops exactly, just this constant hitching feeling. And I don't think this is a hardware issue. Even if you have a high-end PC, people have said that they get this issue. I managed to reduce it a bit through the Nvidia control panel settings, but even after tweaking some stuff, there was still light stuttering throughout the game, which definitely hurts immersion in a game that's almost entirely dialogue and exploration. Somehow though, despite all that, the game never crashed once during my entire 12-hour playthrough, which honestly surprised me. Gameplay wise, this is where the council becomes way more interesting than I expected it to be, because it's structured almost like an RPG disguised as a Telltale game. You have skills, focus points, consumables, dialogue checks, character builds, stuff I really wasn't expecting. The game is split into 5 episodes, and throughout them you earn XP that you can spend after sleeping to improve skills. And those skills directly affect dialogue. You can make certain checks cheaper, unlock entirely new options, or even make some interactions free. There's also this focus system where abilities cost focus points, and you recover them using items like Royal Jelly or Saint's Elixir. But early on, there just isn't enough Royal Jelly around the mansion, so the first part of the game can feel frustrating, because you constantly want to use abilities but feel punished for doing so. It gets better later once you have more resources, but early game definitely feels restrictive. Another small thing that annoyed me way more than it should have: you can't skip interactions or dialogue, and in a game this dialogue heavy, that becomes painful fast if you accidentally click the wrong option or re-trigger something you already saw. Weirdly though, once you finish the game and replay chapters, then you can skip dialogue and interactions, which makes me question why that just wasn't an option from the start. What's interesting about the council though is how dramatically my opinion changed episode by episode. Episode 1 honestly almost lost me. It starts very slow, and outside of a couple of interesting characters, not much grabbed me. Louis also just isn't the strongest protagonist, and the game does a pretty poor job making you actually care about him finding his mother, which became a problem when that's basically the entire motivation at the start. The only reason I kept going was because the ending of episode 1 finally hinted that there was something bigger happening. Then episode 2 happened, and suddenly the game became a lot more interesting. This was probably my favourite episode. There's a murder mystery angle, better puzzles, more interesting interactions between characters, and the political tension finally starts becoming engaging. Episode 3 was also quite a good episode, at least the first 3 quarters were. The stakes became higher, things got more intense, and then the game starts introducing supernatural elements. And at first I was skeptical, because up until then, the mystery worked precisely because it felt grounded in manipulation, politics and deception. But even though I wasn't fully sold on the supernatural direction, I was still curious enough to see where it went. And then episode 4 is where things started falling apart for me. The supernatural stuff becomes way more dominant, and personally I just didn't enjoy that direction. There is a plot twist that actually caught me off guard, which I will give the game credit for, but emotionally I didn't really care anymore by that point. And then there's episode 5. Man, this ending completely went off the rails. Without spoiling anything, the game basically abandons a lot of what made the earlier episodes interesting, in favour of becoming something way bigger and crazier than it probably should have been. And instead of making the story feel grand, it just killed my investment. Which is frustrating because the game spends hours building this intriguing mystery and these power dynamics between characters, only for the ending to feel like it belongs to a completely different game. So where do I stand with this in terms of scores? I think the score deserves to be a little higher, maybe going up from a 67 to a 69 or so, but I think the game does let itself down in some aspects, especially in regards to the writing and story. I don't think it is a bad game by any means, but it definitely could have been better. On the tier list, I think I'd put it in B tier, because I think the game is good, but in no way is it a great game, but I wouldn't say it's a mid one either. For the final game, I decided to play Sniper Ghost Warrior. Now this game came out in 2010, developed by CI Games, and looking back at the reception, yeah, it wasn't the best. It has a 55 Metacritic score and a 5.3 user score, which already tells you the situation. One review from 3D Wagos gave it a 51 and called it pretty average overall, criticising the repetitive gameplay, poor AI, and calling it a technological mess, which honestly ended up being weirdly accurate, but I will get to that soon. Then on the higher end, Gamers.at described it as an excellent rough diamond that no one wanted to polish further, and this review actually stuck with me while playing, because there are moments where you can see the potential. The problem is the game spends most of its time actively fighting against that potential. Going into this, I honestly expected a slow, stealth-heavy sniper game. You know, using camouflage, taking people out quietly, basically something more tactical. And technically, the game does have those moments. The issue is that it only remembers it's supposed to be a sniper stealth game for about 25% of the runtime. The rest of the time it turns into the most generic 2010 military shooter imaginable. Honestly, the game shouldn't even be called Sniper Ghost Warrior. It should literally just be called Warrior or something. Because there are so many sections where stealth completely disappears and suddenly you're mowing down waves of enemies with an assault rifle or mounted machine guns, like you're playing a Temu version of Call of Duty. The story doesn't help much either. The narrative is basically your standard military overthrow storyline, where you're sent into this fictional South American island nation with all the stuff you would expect, like the island being taken over by dictatorship. And honestly, I didn't care about any of it. It's one of those stories where characters constantly speak like they're in a trailer for the game, instead of actual conversations. It's just all very generic. There were a couple of moments I enjoyed though, like the spotting mission, as well as those slower sniper sections. These are when the game is at its best. Lining up shots while your spotter gives information actually made me feel like I was playing the game I thought I was going to be playing. But even some of those moments become unintentionally funny. Like there's a section where you're timing sniper shots with fighter jets flying overhead to mask the sound, which looks cool, but the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it became. Because if jets are screaming across the sky directly above a military camp, surely the enemies are already on alert. It feels less like something designed to make sense and more like the developers went, wouldn't this look sick though? And to be fair, it kinda did. Same with this one scene where your squad blows up a drill platform in this dramatic action sequence. It's just really cheesy. Almost immediately something else started feeling familiar too. The movement, the animations, even the cutscenes reminded me of the original Dead Island. And after looking it up, it made total sense because both games were built on the same engine. And honestly, you can feel it, especially with the terrain, because the terrain in this game is extremely frustrating sometimes. You'll see a slope that clearly looks climbable, sometimes it's even the path the game wants you to take, and then you can just get stuck on absolutely nothing. And in a stealth game, that becomes really annoying really fast. Nothing kills immersion faster than trying to quietly reposition while your character is fighting against a slope. And speaking of stealth, the stealth and AI in this game are a complete mess. It's up there with some of the worst inconsistent AI I've seen in a shooter. Sometimes enemies spot you instantly, while not even looking in your direction, and you're being silent. Other times you can stand in the open, and they react like you're invisible. And the enemy accuracy is hilarious. 1 second they miss every shot imaginable, the next second they transform into a sharpshooter or something, and laser you in half a second from across the map. And I played on medium difficulty. I wouldn't even want to imagine what hard mode looks like. The immersion issues just keep stacking up too. For example, with the sniper rifle, literally any hit instantly kills enemies. You can shoot someone directly in the shin and they die immediately. I feel like this was a missed opportunity. If you shot an enemy in the shin, for example, they could be on the floor making noise, which could alert enemies, which would make you choose your shots more wisely. Also, nearby enemies barely react to unsuppressed gunshots. You can straight up fire a sniper rifle in the middle of a camp and the enemies standing nearby just continue their patrol like nothing happened. There are also some smaller details that become unintentionally funny once you notice them, like climbing ladders while somehow holding a sniper rifle in both hands, or the fact that there's no muzzle flash visible during bullet cam sequences. Which, to be fair, these are tiny issues in the grand scheme of things, but when you have so many then it starts to stack up. I think I could potentially give the game the benefit of the doubt because of the time it released, and I don't have the information on the game's development time or budget. Anyway, the atmosphere could have added some favour with my opinion on the game, but the sound design really lets the game down. The silenced weapons sound outdated. The sound of the pistol in the game reminded me of the pistol from GoldenEye 007, which is not what you want from a game released in 2010. Or maybe you do, I don't really know. The footsteps sound weird, enemy death noises are awkward, and overall the audio just feels cheap. On the bright side though, the rain ambience actually sounded pretty good, but I feel like it's hard to mess up rain. I also ended up turning the music off entirely because it got annoying after a while, and weirdly enough, I actually think the game became more immersive without it. What's frustrating about Sniper Ghost Warrior is that buried underneath all the jank, there actually is the foundation of a decent sniper game. The dedicated sniper sections can be tense, the bullet cam is satisfying, the jungle atmosphere sometimes works, but then the game constantly interrupts itself with bad AI, awkward stealth, immersion breaking design, and generic FPS sections that completely betray the fantasy the title is selling you. I haven't played the other Sniper Ghost Warrior games, but I don't doubt that those games are more polished and focus more on the sniping and stealth aspects of the game. So overall, I did find that the game was the epitome of mid, and so I think that the score I would give the game is a score of 50 bang on, and take away 5 of its points. For the tier list, I would put it in the actually mid C tier. But let me know, am I too harsh, or do you think that it is fair? Anyway, thank you so much for watching my first video on the channel. Let me know down in the comments some mid games, and if I get enough, I'll use them in another video similar to this. With that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day.